The dinner table was set in the grand dining room, elegantly decorated with fine china and flickering candlelight. But the warmth of the room, the scent of the freshly prepared dishes, and the laughter of family quickly faded into the background as Marla's voice sliced through the air like a knife. "Pregnant again? How utterly disappointing," she sneered, her words dripping with contempt. My heart dropped as I slowly looked up from my plate. Marla's cold, calculating gaze locked onto me, and for a moment, everything around us seemed to blur. I could feel the sting of her words cutting into me, yet I remained silent, unwilling to give her the satisfaction of a response. Beside me, Jake shifted uncomfortably, his eyes on his plate, avoiding any form of confrontation, as usual. The weight of his silence was unbearable. Marla wasn't done. She leaned back in her chair, her gaze never leaving me. "Another daughter, I assume? When are you going to give my son the heir he deserves?" The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I could feel my blood run cold, my face pale as her venomous tone echoed in my mind. This was supposed to be a joyful moment, a celebration of new life, but somehow, Marla had twisted it into a humiliating spectacle. I could feel my pulse quicken, a wave of frustration rising inside me. "Mother, please," Jake muttered, his voice weak, but Marla waved him off dismissively, her eyes flashing with irritation. "Don't mother me," she snapped. "You're as frustratingly submissive as your father. If you don't control your wife, she'll keep popping out these disappointing female placeholders." The blood rushed to my face as tears stung my eyes. I could feel the anger burning in my chest, but I knew better than to lash out. This wasn't the first time Marla had torn me down, and I knew it wouldn't be the last. My mind raced, but all I could muster was, "Zoe is not a placeholder. She's our beloved daughter. And this pregnancy is still early. We don't even know the sex yet." Marla rolled her eyes, the sneer never leaving her lips. "Oh, spare me," she mocked. "With your track record, it's clearly another girl. You're a broodmare failure." I could feel my hands trembling as I gripped the edge of the table. The urge to scream, to fight back, was overwhelming. But I knew from experience that it would be futile. Marla had always been this way, cruel, manipulative, and utterly incapable of empathy. No matter what I said, it would never be enough to make her stop. And worse, Jake, the man I married, just sat there, staring into his plate, letting it all happen. The air felt suffocating as I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I need some air," I managed, my voice trembling. I turned and walked quickly away from the table, ignoring the shocked silence that followed me. I needed to escape, to breathe. I rushed out to the back patio, my heart racing as hot tears blurred my vision. How could she be so hateful, so demeaning? I let out a shaky breath, trying to compose myself, but just as I wiped away my tears, I heard footsteps approaching. My stomach tightened in fear, bracing for another round of insults, but to my surprise, it wasn't Marla who followed me. It was Jake. His face was etched with sadness, and for a moment, I thought he might finally say something to defend me. But as he stepped closer, he looked at me with apologetic eyes. "Lena, I'm so sorry." "She was completely out of line back there," he said softly, his voice sincere, but hollow. I couldn't stop myself from pulling my hand away. "Jake, I've listened to her for 8 years, I said, my voice thick with frustration. "And I'm done. When are you finally going to stand up to your mother?" Jake's expression faltered, and for a brief moment, he looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "You know how she is," he mumbled weakly. "She'll never change." That was it. In that moment, I realized with a sickening clarity that he never would change either. He would always be under her thumb, and I would always be the target of her cruelty. The illusion of our marriage, the belief that we were a team, shattered in an instant. I turned away from him, heading back inside, leaving him standing there, empty-handed. I knew then that this was the beginning of the end. And what I didn't know yet, but would soon discover, was just how devastating the consequences of this night would be. I walked back inside, trying to steady my breath, my pulse still pounding in my chest. The silence that had once been comforting now felt like a suffocating weight. I could hear Marla's voice, almost dripping with satisfaction, from the other room. "Lena," she called sweetly, "I have some news that might shake things up a bit." I froze. Her tone was too calm, too deliberate. My stomach twisted with a mix of dread and confusion. What more could she possibly do? What new form of humiliation had she planned this time? I stepped cautiously into the kitchen, my gaze darting to where Marla stood, her hand resting lightly on the counter, a thin, knowing smile curling on her lips. It wasn't the first time I'd seen that smile, the kind that made my skin crawl, the kind that said, "I've already won." She had that same smug expression whenever she was about to deliver the crushing blow she knew would devastate me. With an exaggerated sigh, she leaned forward, lowering her voice to something that was meant to sound almost sympathetic. "You know," she started, her words slow and measured, "I've been so concerned about securing a legitimate heir for my son. A daughter is lovely, but it simply won't do for carrying on the family legacy." My heart skipped a beat. The words she was saying, they didn't feel real. I had no idea where this was going, but I could already feel the tension rising. I forced a smile, trying to mask the growing unease. "What are you talking about, Marla?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced over her shoulder, as if making sure no one else was around to hear. I could sense the malicious delight in her eyes, the satisfaction of delivering a well-rehearsed line that would land like a bomb. "Well," she continued, her voice low, "since you've clearly proven incapable of providing what my son needs, I've taken matters into my own hands." She paused, watching me carefully, gauging my reaction. My stomach turned, and I felt the blood drain from my face as the cold reality of what she was implying began to sink in. "What do you mean?" I whispered, almost too afraid to ask. Marla didn't hesitate. She was relishing this moment, savoring my confusion and panic. "I introduced Jake to a wonderful young lady, Sienna. She's fertile, devoted, and more than capable of providing him with the son he deserves." The world around me seemed to blur. I could barely breathe as the words hit me like a physical blow. "Another woman?" I struggled to hold myself together, but my hands were shaking, my chest tightening with disbelief. You brought another woman into our marriage?" I managed to choke out. "To have a baby with my husband?" Marla waved her hand dismissively, as if I were making a scene over nothing. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she said, almost patronizingly. "I'm doing what's best for my son's future. You've proven quite incapable in that regard." Her words were cold, heartless, and yet somehow so casual, as though she was talking about an everyday arrangement, not the destruction of my family. I was shaking now, my whole body trembling with anger, with hurt, with betrayal. Jake knew about this, I realized. He had to. And if he didn't, how could he have let it happen? The world spun around me, my breath quick and shallow. My mind was racing, but I couldn't process everything all at once. How had I not seen this coming? "Does Jake even know about this?" I asked, barely able to keep my voice steady. Marla's smile widened as she stepped aside, revealing Jake, standing in the doorway. Behind him was a woman I didn't recognize, young, slim, and far too polished. She looked at me with wide, innocent eyes that I knew were nothing more than an act. This was the woman Marla had chosen for him, the woman she thought could do what I couldn't, give him a son. Jake's eyes avoided mine as he stepped into the room, a heavy silence hanging in the air. My throat tightened as I looked at him, waiting for him to say something, anything, that would explain this, that would explain him. But all he did was lower his gaze, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "This is Sienna," Marla said proudly. "She's going to give Jake the heir we've all been waiting for. I trust you'll be understanding." She looked at me as if I were the problem, as if I were the one standing in the way of family progress. My mind screamed in disbelief, and suddenly, I couldn't hold it in anymore. You allowed this?" I whispered, my voice trembling with fury. "Your own mother brought another woman into our marriage to bear your child?" Jake's silence was deafening. I wanted to scream, but the words stuck in my throat. He was letting this happen. He wasn't just complicit, he was an active participant in my humiliation. The tears that I'd been fighting to hold back suddenly threatened to spill, but I refused to let him see me break down. Not in front of him. How could you do this to me, Jake? My voice was low, barely more than a breath, but the hurt and betrayal in it was enough to cut through the silence between us. After everything, after us, you're just going to hand me over like I was nothing? Sienna, the woman Marla had brought into our lives like some sort of prize, opened her mouth, but before she could speak, I turned on her with fury. And you, I spat. Did you even think about the family you were destroying when you spread your legs for a married man? The words flew out of me, raw and full of disgust. Sienna recoiled, her fake smile faltering, but she quickly composed herself. She was no more than a tool in Marla's game, and I knew it. But that didn't stop the fury from boiling inside me. Jake finally met my gaze, his eyes hardening as he spoke in a calm, rehearsed voice. This is for the greater good, Lena. My duty as a man. If you could have done your wifely duties properly, we wouldn't have to go to such extremes. His words struck me like a slap, each one more painful than the last. I felt like I was suffocating. The illusion of love, of loyalty, shattered in that instant. I stood there in disbelief, my legs weak, but the anger in me burned so fiercely that I didn't feel it. This is how you repay me? I said, my voice low and cold. You've decided to throw everything away, me, our family, because of your mother's sick obsession with a son. Marla laughed softly, enjoying my pain, enjoying my brokenness. Don't worry, dear, she said. Once Sienna properly breeds, you can focus your energy on my granddaughter. We wouldn't want you to feel completely useless. That was the final straw. My body moved before my mind could even register what was happening. I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy ceramic vase, and hurled it toward her, every ounce of rage and heartbreak packed into that single motion. The vase hit Marla squarely in the face, shattering on impact. Blood and ceramic shards flew across the room, and for a moment, everything was silent. Marla crumpled to the floor, clutching her face, howling in agony. Sienna screamed, stepping back in horror. My chest heaved as I turned toward Jake, the man I had once called my husband. His eyes were wide with shock, but there was no trace of regret, no apology. I didn't care anymore. This was it. There was no going back. Get out, I said, my voice icy. Take your mother and your mistress, and get out of my life. I'm done. This part of the story is meant to unfold the full extent of the betrayal Lena faces, setting the stage for her transformation into a woman who will no longer stand by while her marriage is destroyed. It's a powerful moment that should captivate the audience and set the tone for the emotional journey that follows. I stood there, my breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps as I watched Marla crumble on the floor, clutching her face, her shrieks echoing through the room. Sienna's shocked expression mirrored the chaos in my mind. I didn't know what I was feeling anymore, rage, disgust, relief? The world had just shattered around me, and I was standing in the ruins of my marriage, staring down at the woman who had single-handedly destroyed everything. Jake hadn't moved. He stood there, his face pale, his hands at his sides, as though he didn't even know what to do with himself. I felt a cold bitterness sink deep into my bones. This was it. This was how it ended. I wanted to say more. I wanted to scream at him, to tear into him for everything, for allowing this to happen, for not protecting me, for not protecting Zoe. But no words came out. What was the point? What more could I say to someone who had already proven that he would let his mother dictate the course of our lives? Without a word, I turned and walked toward the door. I didn't even look back. Jake's voice, small and weak, barely reached my ears. Lena, please. I didn't stop. Lena, don't leave like this. Please, don't. But it was too late. The finality in my step said everything. I stepped into the cold night air, my lungs filling with the crisp, chilling breeze that seemed to clear my head, even if only for a moment. I had to think. I had to make sense of what had just happened. How had we gotten here? How had I let it get this far? The truth slapped me in the face with brutal clarity. I had been a fool to believe in this marriage for so long. I had been a fool to think that Jake would ever choose me over his mother, that he would ever stand up to her. I had been a fool to think that love could conquer all. And that was the hardest pill to swallow. Because I had loved him, really loved him, and I thought he loved me back. But he didn't. Not in the way I needed him to. Not in the way I deserved. I heard the door creak open behind me, and I knew who it was before I even turned around. Lena, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Jake's voice cracked, and I could hear the desperation in it. I turned to face him, my eyes cold and unreadable. Sorry? I repeated, my voice trembling with barely contained fury. Is that all you have to say? After everything? After you let your mother pimp me out like some charity case? Jake flinched as if I had slapped him, but I didn't care. He deserved more. I deserved more. I never wanted this to happen. I didn't know she'd go this far, Lena. I didn't. You didn't know? I interrupted, stepping closer, my voice rising. You didn't know? You didn't know your mother was planning to destroy us? You didn't know she was ready to hand you off to some other woman so she could get her precious son? You didn't know that she was turning our marriage into a joke? Jake recoiled as if my words physically hurt him, but there was nothing left in me to soften it. No more kindness. No more patience. I didn't think she'd go this far. I didn't think she'd. I didn't think. Of course, you didn't, I spat. Because you've never had to think for yourself, have you, Jake? Everything you do, everything you are, is because of her. You spent your whole life letting her control you. And I've spent 8 years, trying to convince myself that things would get better, that you'd change. But here we are. And nothing's changed. You're still her little boy, and I'm still the wife you never fought for. His eyes were wide with guilt, but there was something else there, something darker, a mix of resentment and fear, as if he were afraid of the truth coming out. Lena, please. I never wanted this. I swear I didn't. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. You didn't want it? You just let it happen, Jake. You sat by while your mother destroyed everything I ever believed in. You let her ruin our family for a son you don't even have yet. My heart burned with the realization that he would never change, that I would always be the one left to clean up the mess he made. I could feel the weight of my anger settling into something colder, something more dangerous. I was done. There was nothing left to say. I don't want your apologies, Jake, I said, my voice icy. I don't want your excuses. I want a life that doesn't involve you or your mother. I want my daughter, my sanity, and the chance to start over without all of this poison. Jake opened his mouth, but I held up my hand. I didn't need to hear another word. I'm done. I'm done with you, Jake. And I'm done with your mother. Before he could say anything else, I turned and walked out of the house, leaving him standing there, helpless and broken. The chill of the night air bit at my skin, but I barely felt it. The only thing I felt was the fire of determination building inside me. I had no idea what would come next, but I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't going to let them win. Not now. Not ever again. I didn't need him. I didn't need her. And most importantly, I didn't need anyone who would tear me down just to build themselves up. I was going to take control of my life. And I was going to make them all pay for the pain they'd caused. This part of the story marks a critical turning point. Lena is no longer the submissive wife trying to fix everything, she's a woman who has had enough, and now, she's determined to stand up for herself and her daughter, no matter the cost. The cold night air still clung to my skin as I stood outside, trying to catch my breath. Every step I took away from Jake, from the nightmare I had just endured, felt like I was finally shedding layers of pain. I felt free. But underneath the brief sense of relief, there was still a storm raging inside me. How could he? How could they? I knew I couldn't stand there forever, lost in the suffocating silence of my own thoughts. I needed to move, to act. I had to find a way forward, a way to take back control of my life, before I was consumed by the whirlwind of betrayal and humiliation. I had no choice now, but to fight. To fight for myself, for Zoe, for the life I deserved. The following days passed in a haze of disbelief and cold, relentless determination. I knew what I had to do. I had to fight back, not just for the right to raise my daughter, but for my dignity, my sanity. The person I had been, the woman who had silently endured Jake's weakness and Marla's cruelty, had to die. She had no place in this new life I was about to build. The Lena who walked away from that house was stronger, angrier, and no longer willing to let anyone push her around. I wasted no time. I reached out to Caroline Weston, one of the most aggressive divorce attorneys in the city. She'd built a reputation for being able to tear through the most complex, high-profile cases with a fury that could not be matched. She was exactly what I needed. And when I met her, she didn't disappoint. "Lena, you're not dealing with just a divorce," Caroline said, looking over the details I'd brought her. "This is about alienation of affection. Your husband has committed financial fraud, and his mother has been orchestrating this whole mess. You need to be prepared for a fight, but trust me, he's going to regret ever crossing you." It felt like a weight had been lifted just by hearing her confidence. I wasn't alone in this fight anymore. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't just a wife abandoned by her husband, I was a woman ready to reclaim everything she had lost. Caroline went to work quickly, gathering evidence, organizing documents, and preparing the legal battle I had no idea would become my entire life for the next few months. I couldn't sit idly by while Jake and Marla tried to steal everything from me. They would pay. I knew the stakes. But there was something else weighing heavily on my mind. Zoe. My beautiful, innocent daughter. She had no idea what was happening. She had no idea that her father, her protector, had betrayed her mother so completely. I had to shield her from the worst of it. I had to make sure she didn't feel the fallout of this betrayal, not until she was old enough to understand. So, I made arrangements for Zoe to stay with my sister Nina, who lived in a town a few hours away. Nina was an elementary school teacher, the kind of stable, loving presence Zoe needed in the coming months. It hurt, though. It hurt to see Zoe's bright eyes filled with confusion as I kissed her goodbye, whispering that everything would be okay. I wasn't sure if I even believed it, but I had to say it for her sake. That night, alone in the silence of our now empty home, I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that gnawed at me. It was overwhelming. I could feel it in every room, in every corner, in the very walls of the house. It was the house we had bought together, the house I thought we'd grow old in. But now, it felt like nothing more than a monument to lies and manipulation. I spent the next few days poring over financial records, everything I could find, no matter how small it seemed. There had to be something that would give me leverage, something that would expose Jake and Marla for what they truly were. I wasn't disappointed. As I dug deeper, I found it, the offshore accounts, the discrepancies in the business reports, the unreported money flowing through Jake's company like a river. It was criminal. There was no way to explain it away. And it was exactly what I needed to ensure that Marla's reign over him would come to an end. This wasn't just a divorce anymore. This was war. I knew that the only way to truly end this, to end them, was to expose everything. I had to make them pay for what they had done. For the lies. For the cruelty. For the years of being trapped in a marriage where I had to beg for Jake's attention, to beg for his love, only to realize that I was never enough for him. Not while his mother had her claws in him. The next meeting with Caroline was everything I had hoped for. As she reviewed the evidence I had gathered, her eyes lit up with a cold fire. "This is perfect," she said, her voice sharp with approval. "We've got them by the balls, Lena. Your ex-husband and his mother won't know what hit them." Her confidence was contagious, and I felt my own resolve harden. I wasn't just fighting for Zoe and myself. I was fighting for every woman who had ever been torn down by a man too weak to stand up for her. I was fighting for every moment I had wasted, every tear I had shed, every sacrifice I had made for a family that never truly cared about me. As the days passed, I began preparing for the legal battle of my life. I secured temporary custody of Zoe, made sure all my financials were in order, and filed the divorce papers. I had a plan. And I wasn't going to stop until I got everything I deserved. But just as I was beginning to feel the weight of the world lift off my shoulders, a knock at the door broke my focus. My heart stopped for a moment. Who could that be? I opened the door cautiously, my heart hammering in my chest, and there he was. Mr. Collins, the lawyer for Jake and Marla. Mrs. Redding, he said briskly, holding out a folder. My client has prepared these documents for you to review and sign. My stomach twisted in an icy knot as I glanced at the folder. So it begins. I didn't take it immediately. Instead, I studied him, my eyes narrowing. What's this? I asked, my voice steady, even though my heart was racing. The petition for dissolution of marriage, he said, with a practiced coldness. And the terms for division of assets. I glanced at the folder again, then back at him. The tone in his voice told me this wasn't just a simple divorce. This was their attempt to crush me, to take everything I had fought for. I didn't flinch. Instead, I reached for the folder, but I didn't look at it. I'll sign nothing without my lawyer reviewing it, I said firmly, my voice unwavering. You can tell your client that the game's just begun. This part of the story dives deeper into Lena's transformation. It shows her taking control of her life, navigating the complexities of the divorce, and preparing for a legal battle that will not just be about ending her marriage, it will be about exposing the truth, reclaiming her dignity, and making sure Jake and Marla are held accountable for their actions. The tension builds as she prepares for the war ahead. The next few weeks blurred together, each day passing like a relentless wave crashing against me. But through it all, I kept my focus. The battle I was waging wasn't just legal, it was personal. Every piece of evidence, every legal motion, every hour spent building my case brought me closer to the one thing I'd been denied for so long, peace. Caroline was a powerhouse, and with each passing day, she carved a path toward victory. The letters from Jake's lawyers, the threats, the underhanded tactics they tried to pull, they didn't faze me anymore. I had seen their tricks, felt the sting of their betrayal, but now I was prepared to strike back. In the weeks leading up to the court hearing, I found myself less and less concerned with the material things I'd once thought mattered, the house, the car, the money. Those were just things. What I wanted, what I needed, was my daughter. I needed to protect Zoe from the toxic world Jake and Marla had tried to create, and I would do anything to shield her from it. Every morning, I woke up with a new fire inside me, my resolve hardening with each passing moment. I began to rebuild my life. A small apartment in a quiet part of town became our new home. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Zoe came home from Nina's house after a few months, her smile bright, but there was a sadness in her eyes that I couldn't ignore. She knew something had happened, but I couldn't tell her everything, not yet. One evening, as I tucked Zoe into bed, she looked up at me, her small hand clutching mine with a question I wasn't prepared for. "Mommy, why isn't Daddy here?" My heart squeezed painfully, and I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Daddy has to be somewhere else for a little while, sweetie," I said softly, stroking her hair. "But it's okay. Mommy and you are together, and that's all we need." She nodded, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "Will he come back?" I hesitated. For a moment, I thought about lying, about telling her that things would go back to normal. But that wasn't the truth. Not anymore. "I don't know, baby," I whispered, my voice breaking slightly. "But we're going to be okay. I promise." I left her room with a heavy heart, but a fire burning brighter than ever inside me. I couldn't afford to lose focus now. I couldn't afford to let the past consume me, no matter how badly I wanted to scream at the injustice of it all. It wasn't long before I received the call I'd been waiting for, the date for the court hearing had been set. The moment I'd been preparing for had arrived. Jake and Marla had no idea what they were up against. I had made sure of that. When the day of the hearing came, I walked into the courtroom with my head held high. Caroline was with me, a force to be reckoned with in her own right. Across the room, I saw Jake. His face was drawn, his eyes bloodshot and weary. Beside him, Marla stood tall, her usual smugness replaced by something colder, more calculating. They thought they were in control. They thought they had won. But they hadn't seen the evidence I had hidden away. They hadn't seen what I was willing to do to protect my family. As we sat down, I felt my pulse quicken. The case was about to begin. The judge entered the room, and the proceedings started. I could feel Marla's eyes on me, sharp and unrelenting. She had always been the puppet master, always pulling the strings from behind the scenes, but not today. Today, the game was different. Caroline presented the case with precision, methodically laying out the facts, exposing Jake's financial crimes, and revealing Marla's manipulative tactics. The room fell into a stunned silence as the truth spilled out, how Marla had conspired to break up our marriage, how she had sought to control every aspect of Jake's life, how they had both plotted behind my back to get what they wanted. And then came the devastating blow, the offshore accounts, the money laundering, the evidence of their shared deceit. Jake's face paled as each piece of the puzzle fell into place. I could see Marla's smug mask begin to crack. For the first time in years, I saw fear in her eyes. It wasn't fear of losing the case, not yet. But it was the fear of being exposed, of losing the control she had so carefully cultivated over her son. When it was my turn to speak, I stood tall. The weight of everything I had endured, everything I had fought for, was behind me. I looked at Jake, sitting there like a broken man, and I didn't feel the anger I once had. Instead, I felt nothing. He was no longer a part of my world. I trusted you, I said quietly, my voice cutting through the silence. I loved you, and I gave everything for this family. But you failed me. You let your mother destroy everything we built. And for that, there is no coming back. I turned to Marla, my gaze unwavering. You destroyed my marriage. You tried to take my daughter from me. You tried to break me. But you failed. And now, you will pay for the destruction you've caused. There was no more hiding behind the facade. No more pretending that any of this was normal or acceptable. This was the reckoning, the moment where they could no longer escape the consequences of their actions. The hearing dragged on for hours. The tension in the room was palpable. But in the end, I knew I had won. The evidence was irrefutable. The truth had come out, and there was no way for Jake and Marla to worm their way out of it. The judge ruled in my favor, full custody of Zoe, and a fair division of assets. Jake and Marla were left with nothing but the wreckage they had caused. As I walked out of the courtroom, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. It wasn't over, there would be more battles to face. But today, I had reclaimed my life. I had reclaimed my daughter. And for the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I had won. And nothing, no one, would ever tear my family apart again. In this final section, Lena's transformation is complete. She stands up for herself, exposes the lies and betrayals, and wins back her dignity, her daughter, and her freedom. The emotional weight of the story shifts as Lena's journey of survival and strength leads her to a place of peace, albeit hard-earned.